The alarm sounds cut through space like screaming metal, reaching every corner of 17 different star systems at once. Commander Park Ji-ho felt his blood turn cold as the message came through his communication device. After sleeping for 1,000 years in the dark depths of the Andromeda Nebula, the Devourer had finally woken up. This wasn't just any ordinary space creature. The Devourer was a living nightmare that stretched 50 kilometers from end to end. It looked like someone had mixed a giant machine with a living animal, creating something that shouldn't exist. In just 3 days, this monster had already turned 3 entire planets into dead, empty rocks floating in space. Inside the Great Council chamber on the space station, Lee Min-ah watched as alien representatives ran for the exits. She was the only human in the room, and while everyone else was panicking, she stayed seated at her desk. Reports kept coming in through the communication systems, and each one brought worse news than the last. The beast had skin that looked like dark crystal, and nothing could hurt it. Every weapon that the galaxy's smartest civilizations had ever created just bounced off like raindrops hitting a window. But that wasn't even the worst part. The creature had some kind of mental power that drove other living beings completely insane. Most alien species couldn't even get close to it without losing their minds completely within a few hours. The Etherians are running away to the far edge of the galaxy, the Council's computer voice announced to the nearly empty chamber. The Etherians were known as the wisest race in the galaxy, beings who had lived for millions of years and had seen everything. If they were running, things were really bad. The Krathari military has pulled all their ships back past the safe zone, the computer continued. The Krathari were the toughest fighters in known space, warriors who had never backed down from any battle. They had armies that could destroy entire solar systems, but even they wanted nothing to do with this creature. All around the galaxy, the oldest and most powerful civilizations were doing the same thing. They were packing up their most important things and getting as far away as possible. Some were even talking about leaving the galaxy entirely and finding somewhere else to live. The fear was spreading faster than the creature itself. But in the human section of the council chamber, something different was happening. Lieutenant Kim Tae-wook stood quietly next to a table covered with papers and computer screens. He wasn't running around in panic like everyone else. He wasn't even sweating. Instead, he was reading through reports and studying charts like he was preparing for a regular work meeting. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Compared to civilizations that had been traveling through space for millions of years, humans were like babies who had just learned to walk. Most of the older alien races still thought of humans as primitive creatures who barely understood how to build proper spaceships. Yet here was this young human officer, calm as could be, while species with technology beyond human understanding were fleeing in terror. He had been working with a team of human scientists who studied alien life forms, and they had been watching the Devourer very carefully since it first appeared. "Ma'am," Kim Tae-wook said quietly to Lee Min-ah, his voice steady and professional. "Our biology teams have finished studying the creature." Lee Min-ah looked up from her own stack of reports. Around them, the last few alien council members were grabbing their belongings and rushing toward the exit doors. The great chamber that usually held representatives from hundreds of different worlds was becoming almost empty. The situation was clear to everyone in the galaxy. The most dangerous predator in known space had returned, and it was heading toward the center of the galaxy, where most civilizations lived. Every military force was retreating. Every government was preparing evacuation plans. Every species was getting ready to abandon their homes and run. Everyone except the humans, who seemed to have something else in mind entirely. The emergency council meeting had been called with only 2 hours' notice. But Captain Song Da-eun walked into that chamber like she was heading to a casual lunch meeting. Around the curved walls of the Great Hall, holographic projections showed representatives from across the galaxy. Most of them looked terrified, their various alien features twisted with fear and desperation. Elder Vorthak was one of the oldest beings in the known universe. His species had been exploring space when humans were still living in caves. His long purple tentacles normally moved with graceful dignity, but now they were thrashing around like angry snakes as he listened to the human captain's presentation. "Let me understand this correctly," Vorthak said, his voice shaking with disbelief. While every civilized species in the galaxy is preparing to evacuate, you humans want to hunt the Devourer. Captain Song Daun stood at the center of the chamber, completely relaxed despite being surrounded by panicking alien leaders. She had her hands clasped behind her back in a military pose, but her face showed the kind of calm confidence that you might see on someone planning a weekend camping trip. "That's exactly what we're proposing," she said simply. The reaction was immediate. Representatives started shouting in dozens of different alien languages. Some were clicking, others were making musical sounds, and a few were communicating through flashing lights on their bodies. But the message was clear in every language. They all thought the humans had lost their minds. Dr. Choi Soo-jin stepped forward, carrying a glowing tablet that displayed charts and graphs that she had been working on for weeks. She was a small woman with short black hair and thick glasses, but she moved with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life studying the most dangerous creatures in the universe. "We've been analyzing the Devourer's behavior patterns," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What we've discovered is fascinating. This creature doesn't just eat planets and civilizations for physical nourishment. It actually feeds on the fear and terror of its victims." She touched her tablet, and the air above the council floor filled with three-dimensional images showing the creature's attack patterns. The hologram showed how the Devourer had approached each of its victims, and how those civilizations had responded. "Look at this data," Dr. Choi continued. "Every single species that has encountered this creature has done exactly the same thing. They either ran away immediately, or they became so paralyzed with fear that they couldn't fight back effectively. In both cases, the creature consumed them easily." A Cynthian delegate, who looked like a walking crystal formation, suddenly screeched, so loudly that the translation systems briefly overloaded. When the feedback stopped, his words came through clearly. "Because that's the rational response. Any intelligent being would run from something that dangerous." Captain Song Daeun smiled slightly, the kind of expression you might see on someone who had just been told that climbing mountains was impossible. "Rationality isn't exactly our species' strongest trait," she said with a small laugh. "Around the chamber?" Alien representatives stared at her in confusion. Most galactic civilizations prized logic and careful thinking above all else. The idea that a species might be proud of being irrational was completely foreign to them. "Our xenobiologist Yang Ho-seok has been studying the creature's feeding patterns for months," Captain Song continued. "He believes he's identified a critical weakness in how it hunts and consumes its prey." Lee Min-ah, still the only human representative officially seated on the council, stood up and activated the chamber's main holographic display system. The air filled with technical diagrams showing spaceship designs and battle formations that looked completely different from anything the other species had ever seen. "We're requesting permission to access your derelict fleet yards," Lee Min-ah announced. "We want to take the old abandoned warships that nobody else wants anymore." Elder Vorthak's tentacles stopped thrashing and went completely still. "You want our old ships? The ones we were going to scrap for metal?" "That's right," Lee Min-ah replied. "But we're not going to arm them with weapons. Instead, we want to retrofit them with containment fields, neural dampeners, and specialized communication equipment." The silence in the chamber was complete. Every alien representative was trying to process what they had just heard. The humans wanted to take garbage ships, remove all the weapons, and then fly them directly toward the most dangerous predator. In galactic history, Dr. Choi stepped forward again. "The key insight is that the Devourer expects its prey to either run or fight in traditional ways. We're proposing to do something it has never encountered before." "Which is what, exactly?" asked a Krathari general, his scarred face showing both curiosity and concern. Captain Song Da-eun's smile grew wider. "We're going to try to make friends with it." The space around the dead star looked like something from a nightmare. What had once been a bright, life-giving sun was now just a cold, dark ball of matter floating in the emptiness, and hiding in its shadow was something far worse than death itself. Admiral Han Woo-jin stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the sensor readings as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 18 ships appeared in formation, but these weren't the sleek warships that other species would have brought to such a battle. These were old, beat-up vessels that had been pulled from scrapyards and rebuilt from the ground up. The ships looked rough and patched together, like something a group of teenagers might have built in their garage. But inside each vessel were some of humanity's best and brightest. Deep space marines who had trained in the harshest environments Earth could offer. Scientists who had spent their entire careers studying the strangest life forms in the galaxy, and engineers who could make broken technology work with nothing but spare parts and determination. Distance to target, 3 million kilometers in closing, reported the navigation officer. Through the bridge windows they could see nothing, but empty space and distant stars. But the sensors told a different story. Something massive was waiting for them in the darkness. Communications Officer Park Ye-jin sat at her station, monitoring the specialized equipment that the humans had installed in place of traditional weapons. Her job was to watch for the first signs of the creature's mental attacks, the psychic waves that had driven every other species into complete madness. "Admiral, I'm starting to pick up the first interference patterns," she announced, her voice steady, despite what everyone knew was coming. "The creature knows we're here." On other ships with other species, this would have been the moment when crew members started screaming or collapsing. The Devourer's mental influence was supposed to be irresistible, a psychic force that could break the minds of even the strongest warriors within minutes of contact. But something strange happened on the human ships. As the first waves of psychic energy hit their neural dampening equipment, the crew members didn't fall apart. Instead, they seemed to become more focused, more alert. Marine Captain Jang Min-ho felt it first, a cold sensation that started at the base of his skull and spread through his entire body. It was fear, pure and simple, but not the kind that paralyzed. It was the same feeling his great-great-grandfather might have experienced when facing down a charging bear in the wilderness. The same rush of adrenaline that had kept humanity alive through millions of years of evolution on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. "Status report from all ships," Admiral Han requested over the communication system. One by one, the responses came back. Every vessel reported the same thing. Crew members were experiencing the creature's psychic attack, but instead of breaking down, they were entering what military psychologists called combat awareness mode. Their heart rates increased, their reflexes sharpened, and their minds became laser-focused on the mission ahead. Dr. Kim Soo-bin, the lead xenobiologist on the expedition, monitored these responses from her science station. She had spent months preparing for this moment, studying how human brains responded to extreme stress and fear. What she was seeing confirmed her theories about why humans might be uniquely suited for this impossible mission. "All neural dampeners are functioning within normal parameters," she reported. "Crew psychological profiles are holding steady. We're experiencing normal stress responses, but no signs of the psychotic breaks that other species have reported." The fleet continued moving toward the creature's position, their modified sensors gradually building a clearer picture of what they were approaching. The Devourer was even larger than the reports had suggested. It wasn't just 50 kilometers long. It was a complex structure that seemed to shift and change as they watched it. Parts of it looked like a massive machine, while other sections appeared to be alive and growing. "Phase 1 is approved for execution," Dr. Kim announced after checking her readings one final time. "All volunteers report to launch bays immediately." In the modified cargo holds of 12 different ships, human specialists were climbing into specially designed spacesuits. These weren't ordinary EVA suits for routine maintenance work. They had been equipped with neural interface technology that had never been tested in combat conditions. Each volunteer was essentially turning themselves into a living communication device. Their mission was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in the history of galactic civilization. They weren't going to try to destroy the creature or drive it away. Instead, they were going to fly directly into its sensory organs and attempt to establish contact. They would be the first beings in recorded history to try talking to the galaxy's most feared predator. Sergeant Oh Hyun-woo sealed his helmet and ran through his final equipment checks. Through his suit's communication system, he could hear the voices of the other volunteers doing the same thing on ships throughout the fleet. They all knew the risks. Previous contact attempts with the Devourer had ended with entire crews being consumed or driven insane, but they also knew something that no other species had understood. Sometimes the most dangerous approach was also the only one that might actually work. The inside of the Devourer was nothing like what Lieutenant Im Sung-ho had expected. As his small pod penetrated through the creature's outer shell, he found himself floating in what looked like a vast cathedral made of living tissue and glowing crystals. Walls pulsed with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat, and streams of light flowed through tube-like structures that stretched as far as he could see. His neural interface device activated automatically as soon as he made contact with one of the creature's sensory nodes. The sensation was overwhelming at first, like trying to drink from a fire hose of pure thought and emotion. But his training kicked in, and he managed to filter the flood of information into something his human brain could process. What he discovered in those first few moments changed everything humanity thought they knew about the galaxy's most feared predator. The creature wasn't a mindless monster driven by hunger for destruction. It was ancient beyond imagination, older than the civilizations that had built the first starships, older than the formation of most solar systems, and it was completely, utterly alone. Through the neural connection, Im Sung-ho experienced flashes of the creature's memory stretching back millions of years. He saw it drifting through the void between galaxies, watching from a distance as life developed on countless worlds. He felt its confusion as it observed creatures working together, caring for each other, forming bonds and communities. "Command, this is Im Sung-ho," he managed to transmit back to the fleet, his voice shaking with the weight of what he was discovering. "The entity, it's not evil. It's not trying to hurt anyone. It's lonely. It's been alone for so long that it doesn't remember what it's like to not be alone." Back on the flagship, Captain Yoon Seo-hee coordinated the communication arrays as more human volunteers successfully made contact with different parts of the creature's distributed nervous system. Each new connection brought more pieces of the puzzle, and the picture that emerged was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Dr. Kim Soo-bin monitored the neural readings from her science station, watching as her team made the most significant xenobiological discovery in galactic history. "The creature has been observing other life forms for millions of years," she reported to Admiral Han. "It's seen how different species interact with each other, how they form families and communities and work together. But it's never been able to participate." Through the neural links, the human volunteers began to understand the truth about the Devourer's attacks on other civilizations. What had appeared to be mindless destruction was actually the creature's desperate attempt to connect with other forms of life. It had been trying to merge with other beings, to absorb them into itself so that it could finally experience what it meant to not be alone. The problem was that the creature was so massive and so powerful that its attempts at connection destroyed everything it tried to connect with. It was like a giant trying to pet a butterfly, accidentally crushing it despite having no intention of causing harm. Lieutenant Park Min-seok, connected to a different section of the creature's consciousness, experienced a flood of emotions that nearly overwhelmed his neural dampeners. "It watches other species form relationships," he transmitted to the fleet. "It sees parents caring for children, friends helping each other, entire civilizations working together, and it wants that so badly that the longing is like physical pain." The creature had tried different approaches over the millennia. Sometimes it would approach other beings slowly, trying to communicate, but its sheer size and the psychic energy it naturally radiated would drive them away or kill them before any real contact could be made. Other times, in its desperation, it would try to absorb entire civilizations quickly, hoping to understand their connections by consuming them completely. But every attempt failed. The beings it absorbed would die in the process, leaving the creature with their memories but not the living relationships it craved. It was like trying to understand music by examining the ashes of a burned orchestra. Sergeant Oh Hyun-woo found himself connected to what seemed to be the creature's emotional center. The experience was almost unbearable, like being exposed to millions of years of accumulated sadness and frustration. "It knows that its attempts to connect are destroying what it's trying to connect with," he reported. "But it can't stop trying because the loneliness is worse than the guilt." Captain Yoon Seo-hee processed all these reports while maintaining communication with the other ships in the fleet. What her team was discovering challenged every assumption that galactic civilization had made about their greatest threat. The Devourer wasn't a predator hunting for food or a conqueror seeking to dominate other species. It was a being so fundamentally alone that it had spent millions of years making increasingly desperate attempts to find companionship, accidentally destroying entire civilizations in the process. "Admiral," Captain Yoon reported to Han Woo-jin, "we're dealing with the largest case of social isolation in recorded history. This creature has been trying to make friends for longer than our entire species has existed, and every attempt has ended in tragedy." The revelation sent shockwaves through the human fleet. They had come prepared to hunt the galaxy's most dangerous predator, only to discover that they were facing the galaxy's loneliest being. What came next was the most dangerous experiment in the history of First Contact. Lieutenant Im Seung-ho and his team were about to attempt something that had never been tried before. They were going to merge their minds directly with the Devourer's consciousness, not to destroy it or control it, but to teach it how to make friends without accidentally killing everyone in the process. Dr. Lee Hae-jin floated in her small pod, deep inside the creature's neural chamber, surrounded by the pulsing walls of living tissue and glowing crystals. She had spent her entire career studying how different species communicate and form relationships, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Listen carefully, everyone," she spoke into her communication device, addressing the 12 human volunteers who had successfully made it inside the creature's body. "What we're about to do has never been attempted before. We're going to open our minds completely to this entity, but we have to maintain our own individual consciousness while doing it. If we lose ourselves in its thoughts, we'll be just as dead as if it had consumed us." The process was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. One by one, the human volunteers allowed their neural interfaces to establish deeper connections with the creature's distributed intelligence. It was like diving into an ocean of thought that stretched back millions of years, filled with memories of cosmic loneliness and desperate attempts at connection. But the humans brought something with them that the creature had never experienced before: the ability to share consciousness while still remaining separate individuals. They showed the Devourer how human families worked, how parents could love their children without absorbing them, how friends could support each other while maintaining their own identities. Lieutenant Park Min-seok found himself reliving memories from his childhood, but now the Devourer was experiencing them too. The creature felt what it was like to play games with friends, to help a neighbor fix their roof, to sit around a campfire sharing stories. For the first time in its existence, it understood that connection didn't require consumption. "It's working," Im Seung-ho reported back to the fleet. "The entity is learning to distinguish between parasitic and symbiotic relationships. It's starting to understand that true companionship comes from mutual benefit, not absorption." Through the neural links, the humans began teaching the creature about pack bonding, the instinct that had allowed their species to form complex societies. They showed it how early humans had learned to hunt together, how they had formed tribes and communities, how they had eventually spread across their planet and then across the stars. The Devourer was fascinated by humanity's ability to adopt outsiders into their groups. It experienced memories of humans taking in stray animals, welcoming refugees from other countries, and even forming emotional bonds with artificial intelligences and alien species they had encountered. This was something completely foreign to its experience. Dr. Kim Soo-bin monitored the process from her science station aboard the flagship, watching as the creature's neural patterns began to change. "Admiral, we're seeing remarkable alterations in the entity's brain structure," she reported. "It's actually rewiring itself to accommodate new patterns of social interaction." The transformation wasn't just mental. As the Devourer learned to channel its vast power in new ways, its physical form began to change as well. The dark, predatory crystalline armor that had covered its body for millions of years started to shift and lighten. The black surface that had absorbed light and energy began to reflect it instead, taking on a warm silver color that seemed to glow with inner light. Captain Song Da-eun watched this transformation from the Fleet Command Center, hardly believing what she was seeing. The most feared predator in galactic history was literally reshaping itself, not through force or coercion, but through the simple act of learning how to be a friend. The entity is expressing a desire to choose a new name for itself, reported Sergeant Oh Hyun-woo from his neural link. It no longer wants to be called the Devourer. It wants to be known as the Guardian. The change was more than symbolic. As the creature's understanding of relationships deepened, it began to use its immense power in completely new ways. Instead of consuming the energy of nearby stars, it learned to help stabilize them. Instead of absorbing the life force of planets, it began to protect them from cosmic radiation and asteroid impacts. The Guardian's first act of protection was to shield a small, developing civilization in a nearby star system from a massive solar flare that would have destroyed all life on their planet. The beings living there never knew how close they had come to extinction, or that their savior had once been their greatest threat. Back on the human ships, Admiral Han Woo-jin received reports from across the fleet about the creature's transformation. "Sir, we're receiving communication requests from the Galactic Council," his communications officer reported. "They want to know what we've done." Han smiled as he looked out at the massive being that now floated peacefully near their position, its silver surface reflecting the light of distant stars. "Tell them we made a new friend," he said simply. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had achieved something that no other species had even attempted. They had conquered the deadliest predator in known space not through superior weapons or technology, but through their unique ability to see potential friends everywhere they looked, even in the most unlikely places.